The desert was still asleep when the first light of dawn brushed the Valley of the Kings, turning stone into gold and silence into something almost sacred. Long before the modern world learned to pronounce the name Tutankhamun with awe, this land had already buried and remembered him, hidden beneath layers of sand, time, and deliberate forgetting. His story did not begin as a legend. It began as a fragile life in a turbulent age, an age when gods were questioned, temples were abandoned, and the future of Egypt trembled like a flame in desert wind. Tutankhamun was born into controversy. He arrived in a royal household fractured by religious revolution. His father, Akhenaten, had attempted the unthinkable, replacing Egypt's ancient pantheon with devotion to a single sun disk, the Aten. Temples to Amun were shuttered, priests stripped of power, and the spiritual balance that had defined Egypt for centuries was thrown into chaos. When the boy king was born, Egypt was already divided, its gods angry, its people uncertain. His original name, Tutankhamun, carried the weight of that revolution, binding him to a faith that many quietly resented. When Tutankhamun ascended the throne at around 9 years old, he did not rule alone. Power rested in the hands of advisors, generals, and priests eager to restore the old ways. Under their guidance, the young king's name was changed to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun, signaling a return to traditional gods and an attempt to heal a wounded nation. Temples were reopened, rituals revived, and inscriptions carefully rewritten to erase the memory of the Aten heresy. Egypt exhaled, believing order had been restored, but the boy at the center of this transformation remained a shadowy figure, his own voice largely lost to history. His reign was brief, lasting barely a decade, and his death came suddenly, before he reached adulthood. The circumstances of that death have haunted historians and scientists alike. Was it illness, an accident, infection, or something darker? His fragile body, revealed millennia later, told a story of physical struggle. A malformed foot, a slight frame, signs of genetic stress common in royal bloodlines shaped by generations of intermarriage. He walked with difficulty, relied on canes, and yet was expected to embody divine strength on earth. In death, as in life, Tutankhamun was both powerful symbol and vulnerable human. Because he died young and without a clear heir, Tutankhamun was buried quickly, perhaps hastily, in a tomb that was not originally intended for a king. Larger, more elaborate tombs waited elsewhere in the valley, but time was unforgiving. His burial chamber was sealed, rituals performed, treasures stacked close together in tight spaces. Gold, wood, linen, and stone were layered around his body, not for display, but for protection in the afterlife. The tomb was meant to remain closed forever, its location fading from memory as Egypt moved on. And move on it did. Successive rulers erased Tutankhamun's name from monuments, dismantled his legacy, and claimed his achievements as their own. He was remembered not as a restorer of order, but as an inconvenient echo of a controversial dynasty. His tomb, small and hidden, disappeared beneath debris from later burials. For over 3,000 years, the boy king slept undisturbed, while empires rose and fell above him. When the tomb was finally discovered in 1922, it was not announced by thunder or prophecy, but by a step carved into rock. Howard Carter, after years of disappointment and dwindling funds, realized he was standing at the threshold of something extraordinary. As the sealed doorway was breached and candlelight flickered into the darkness, the world held its breath. Inside lay a vision untouched by time. Gold shimmered in the dust, and the air itself seemed heavy with history. The treasures were overwhelming in number and meaning. Over 5,000 objects crowded the tomb, each carrying both artistic mastery and spiritual purpose. There were chariots built for ceremony and war, thrones inlaid with precious stones, statues meant to guard, and everyday items transformed into sacred companions for eternity. Nothing felt random. Each object spoke of belief in the afterlife, in rebirth, in the journey beyond death that required preparation as meticulous as life itself. At the heart of it all lay the nested coffins, one within another, culminating in the innermost coffin of solid gold. Inside rested Tutankhamun's mummy, wrapped in linen and amulets, his face covered by the now iconic golden mask. The mask was not merely decoration, it was theology cast in metal. The serene expression, the inlaid eyes, the royal cobra and vulture symbolized protection, divinity, and eternal kingship. It was Egypt's promise to its ruler, "You will live forever." As the treasures were removed and catalogued, the world's fascination deepened. But with fascination came fear. Stories of a curse spread quickly, fueled by sudden deaths and superstition. Newspapers declared that the tomb punished those who disturbed it. In truth, the real danger lay not in curses, but in the weight of time, bacteria, and fragile artifacts exposed to modern air. Yet the myth endured, adding another layer to Tutankhamun's mystique, transforming a young, relatively minor king into the most famous pharaoh in history. Science would later peel back more layers. Advances in imaging and DNA analysis allowed researchers to examine the mummy without destroying it. CT scans revealed bone fractures, health conditions, and clues once invisible. Genetic studies traced family lines, confirming relationships long debated. The results painted a picture not of murder or intrigue, but of a young man burdened by poor health, ruling under immense pressure, whose body simply could not endure. Still, the question lingered: why did Tutankhamun matter so much? He did not build vast temples or conquer distant lands. His reign was not marked by grand victories. Yet his tomb offered something no other had: a time capsule, perfectly preserved. Through it, the world glimpsed ancient Egypt not as ruins, but as a living civilization, rich in color, belief, and humanity. His treasures told stories of craftsmanship, religion, daily life, and cosmic order in ways texts alone never could. Each object carried intention. The cairns found in his tomb spoke of mobility and vulnerability. The miniature boats symbolized the soul's journey across the waters of the afterlife. The food offerings reflected belief in continued sustenance beyond death. Even the placement of items followed sacred geometry, aligning with spells from the Book of the Dead, ensuring safe passage through the underworld. Tutankhamun's legacy became larger in death than in life. Museums around the world displayed replicas and originals, igniting global fascination. His mask became an icon of ancient civilization itself, instantly recognizable, endlessly reproduced. Yet behind the gold was still a boy, thrust into power, shaped by forces far beyond his control, remembered not for what he achieved, but for what he left behind. In a way, Tutankhamun became a bridge between worlds. He connected ancient belief systems with modern science, myth with evidence, legend with reality. His tomb forced humanity to confront time not as an enemy, but as a preserver. It showed that history does not always reward the loudest or strongest, but sometimes the quietest, the forgotten, the hidden. Today, as scholars continue to study his remains and artifacts with ever more advanced tools, new questions arise. What more can be learned from the materials, the pigments, the craftsmanship? What secrets still lie locked in the objects themselves, waiting for technology to catch up? Tutankhamun continues to speak, not through words, but through silence, inviting each generation to listen more closely. The desert still watches over the Valley of the Kings, just as it did when the tomb was sealed. Wind erases footprints, but it cannot erase memory. Tutankhamun, once a forgotten child king, now stands immortal, not because he ruled greatly, but because his story survived intact. His treasures are not merely gold and stone, they are fragments of belief, fear, hope, and devotion, preserved against all odds. In the end, Tut's treasures are not hidden secrets of wealth, but of humanity itself. They reveal how deeply people longed for meaning beyond death, how art became prayer, how power and fragility coexisted in a single life. Through him, the ancient world reaches forward, reminding us that even the smallest rain can cast the longest shadow when time decides to protect it.